Welcome to the third in the series of video walks in Sarasota County. We are at the southwest corner of First Street and Lemon Avenue. There is free parking at the Whole Foods parking lot on level 2 and 3. The entrance to the parking area is on 2nd Street, just west of the Whole Foods driveway. Unfortunately, most of the historic places I will be talking about no longer exist, and it will take your imagination, aided by the narrative and pictures, to bring that history alive again. The walk is not that far, and it will not talk about all the buildings or sites that existed here. I hope you like the ones I have chosen. J. Hamilton Gillespie, assigned by his father in Scotland to manage the FMIC, Florida Mortgage and Investment Company, assets in and around Sarasota, knew that the town would flounder unless he found a way to transport goods in from and out to outside markets. The town was on the Sarasota Bay, but the bay would not support steamship traffic because of the depth of water and sandbars. The towns on the Manatee River had up to 5 steamboats a day, and most of the produce in Manatee County went through there to sell in Tampa and other areas. Gillespie had an idea that would increase profits in Sarasota as well as the river towns. He talked with people in Bradentown, and after discussing his idea with the investors in Scotland, he and others in Bradentown incorporated the Manatee and Sarasota Railway and Drainage Company in November of 1889 with capital of $50,000. He soon learned that $50,000 would not a railroad build. Progress stalled, but months later a new prospect came into town. The Arcadia, Gulf Coast, and Lakeland Railroad, the AGCLRR, had incorporated and was funded for $1.5 million. The president of the railroad was Anthony Peters, and the superintendent was John Cross. The two railroad companies talked, and after many discussions, the AGCLRR purchased the charter of the Sarasota and Manatee River Railroad. In addition, Gillespie offered 10,000 acres of FMIC land if the railroad was built between Sarasota and Manatee River by February 21st of 1892. The road was built slowly and the equipment arrived late. They rushed through the last half of the railroad tracks without stabilizing the ground the tracks were laid on, causing a swaying as the engine traveled closer to Sarasota. The story of Sarasota called the railroad the Slow and Wobbly, although it was never called that in the newspaper. Instead, the locomotive was called Old Pete for the president of the railroad. In 1893, the road was worked on and stabilized almost to Sarasota before the funds ran out. Excerpts from the Manatee River Journal, February 11, 1892. The engine which came in Friday bears the name of Anthony Peters, after the president and projector of the road. This engine is one of the celebrated McQueen type, was built by the Schenectady Locomotive Works, carries a 16-inch cylinder, and is no doubt one of the heaviest in the state. February 25th, 1892. A part completed. Sunday afternoon, the 21st, about 4 o'clock, the last rail was laid on the Sarasota division of the AGC and LRR, and the engine stood before the depot in that town. On Monday, the road was formally opened. The 2 passenger coaches, which have been some time on the road, not having arrived, several of our best carpenters fitted a top seat, etc., to a flat car, and the engine Anthony Peters carried down the line, quite a noted gathering, about 40 in all. This frame shows the first schedule of the AGC and LRR, or Old Pete. The Manatee River Journal stated the depot was built on Lemon Avenue near Main Street. The story of Sarasota by Carl Grismer has a different story. The Sarasota station, a little one-room shack, was located about 100 feet west of Orange Avenue near 10th Street, now Fruitville, way out in the woods. It turned out that the AGC LRR was inexperienced and underfunded. They couldn't pay for all the labor and material used, and the next 4 years were met with litigation. Although Old Pete was not a boon for the owners of the railroad, it was a boon for bringing Sarasota and Bradentown together socially. Example, baseball games, church events, beach excursions, and for moving commerce back and forth. In 1893, Mr. T.C. Taliaferro, the president of the First National Bank of Tampa, was named receiver during the litigations. It was his general opinion to keep the railroad going during litigations, and so when possible, the train schedule would continue. Finally, after the tracks were taken up and the locomotive gone in May of 1895, the railway was no more. Partly because of the efforts of Ralph Caples, a Sarasota supporter, and T.C. Taliaferro, the president of a Tampa bank, to start a new railroad line between Tampa and Manatee County, the Florida West Coast Railway, the Seaboard Railroad, rushed its plan to build a road there first. The U.S. and West Indies Railroad and Steamship Company, later incorporated into the Seaboard, started service into Sarasota in April of 1903. It built its passenger and freight depot on the northwest corner of today's First Street and Lemon Avenue, where Whole Foods is today. They continued their tracks down Lemon Avenue to Strawberry Avenue and built a railroad pier to service the local fishing industry. The Sarasota County plaque is the place where the passenger depot was built in 1912. After years of complaints that the dual-purpose depot of 1903 was too small and inconvenient for passengers, the Seaboard relented and the passenger depot was built. In this postcard picture, you can see the freight depot behind the new passenger depot. In July of 1912, the Sarasota Times reported about the new passenger depot. 3 months ago, contractor E.W. Parker of Tampa broke the ground for the new passenger depot, which will in a few days be open to the public, and is a building the town may well be proud of. The depot is between 7th and Main Streets and covers a space of 28 by 70 feet, with 7-foot projections all around. The roof covered with metal shingles and with the outside woodwork painted olive green. The building is of brick veneer. The brick is wire cut, making a rough, dark red finish, presenting a very handsome appearance with a lighter shade of red used to color the cement, and the sill course and steps of brown sandstone. The ticket office is in the center of the building, the waiting rooms for white and black being on either side. A ladies' parlor opens from the waiting room, and a baggage room is on the north end beyond the black waiting room. With the exception of the ticket office, each of the rooms is 26 feet long, extending across the building. The ceilings are high, and the large windows and transoms over the door provide good ventilation. Plumbing fixtures are installed, and every room will be well lighted with electricity. Both waiting rooms and the ladies' parlor have large fireplaces with coal grates. These will be finished in the dark oriental brick and have mantels of quartered oak. The walls have a white sand finish and the woodwork stained in Flemish brown. The furniture will be comfortable and attractive in keeping with the building. A wide cement sidewalk is laid around the depot and extends from Main to 7th Streets. The building cost $7,000 and demonstrates the faith the Seaboard has in Sarasota's growth, and will give our visitors on arriving a first impression of the town very different from that obtained in the past seasons. The Seaboard train depot near the corner of Lemon Avenue and Main Street through the years. Let's start walking south on Lemon Avenue towards Main Street. We notice the building across Lemon Avenue. We'll talk about this location when we get to the corner. We are now at the northwest corner of Lemon Avenue and Main Street. A view of the building across Lemon Avenue from us. This corner was the scene of a great fire, housed the Harry Rigby brick building in the 1920s, and was the third home of the Sarasota Times. Shortly after the Bayview House fire, the fire alarm bell was rung again between 10 and 11 p.m. on February 9th of 1910. This time the fire began in the Bradley boarding house over the stable. The building, the lower part used as a stable, the second story was the Bradley board and lodging house, while the third story was the camp of the woodmen of the world. Next to the stables was the dwelling of A.W. Bradley, and in the rear of the stables and along the railroad was the yards of the Sarasota Lumber Company, and all of this property was consumed. The Eliza Grantham house to the right of the stables was miraculously saved. The Jones and McAlpin Lumber and Feed store directly behind the livery was saved because the building had metal sides and roof. Across the street, you will see the spot where the Sarasota County Times moved to in September of 1921. The brick building was built in 1920 by Harry Rigby, an architect and builder. This represented the third physical home for the Sarasota Times and the first one owned by Mrs. Rose Wilson. This was also the first transfer of real estate made in Sarasota County, the deed having been given July 1st, the day the county went into operation, and this deed was the first recorded in the new county. The Sarasota County Times was then sold by Mrs. Rose Wilson to the Sarasota Publishing Company, owned by T.J. Campbell and J.H. Lord, on January 1st, 1923. They, in turn, sold the Sarasota Times to L.D. Regan in March of 1924, and in May of 1926, Mr. Regan moved the newspaper operations to a new building on 7th Street, now 1st Street near Broadway, now North Tamiami Trail. Across diagonally from us is the site of the William Worth Wooden Building. William Worth, originally from Douglas, Georgia, had lived in Wauchula, Florida for many years before moving to Englewood. There he served as postmaster for a short period before moving to Sarasota. In 1903, Mr. Worth built a wooden building at the southeast corner of Lemon Avenue and Main Street to house his grocery business. At that time, he joined the newly formed Baptist Church and became very active, as we will see later in this walk. In 1911, he expanded the wooden building to a two-story building with 25-foot frontage and 100-foot depth, and his son David went into business with him. In December of 1912, he and his son had built a two-story brick building across the street and moved their business there while retaining ownership of the wooden building. From 1913 to 1923, the wooden building housed the cigar factory, Kennedy and Thompson Furniture, D.W. Frazier 5 and 10 store, and J.A. Clark Dry Goods. After this time, it was bought by Dean Alvord of Clearwater, demolished, and a new building erected. Through the years, many businesses were home on this corner. Used to be Liggett's Drugs, in 1940, Bay Drugs, Ellie's Book and Stationery, Burger King, Brooks Brothers, and now Blue Mercury, which is a cosmetic and beauty supply firm. As mentioned earlier, the Worth father and son in 1912 had the two-story brick block built. The Worths lived upstairs and the business was on the first floor. Although the city plaque shows the Worth two-story brick block being built in 1913, it was actually built in 1912, and the Sarasota Times reported on December 5th that Mr. Worth's brick block had been completed. The family expect to move next week to occupy the second floor. From 1912 through 1923, the father, William, or son, W.D., or both, managed the business at this spot. In 1923, William Worth sold the business and building to J.B. Taylor of Bee Ridge, him naming the business Taylor Grocery Company. In years following, it became a real estate office, a cigar store, and soda fountain. The Gator Bar and Grill started in 1933 with slot machines. In 1940, it was renamed the Gator Bar. And finally, in 1988, Jay Foley bought the building and returned the looks back to the original appearance and renamed it the Gator Club. The corner cigar store in 1925, owned by J.D. Harmon, located in the Worth block. Harmon installed a ticker tape and scoreboard in the cigar store to keep track of current sports scores. Before baseball World Series games were broadcast on radio, crowds would gather outside the cigar store to hear reports of the action as it came over the wire, often tying up traffic for hours. This crowd was listening to the updates of the World Series in September 1925. The final was Pittsburgh of the National League 4 and Washington of the American League 3. Note, you can see the original wooden Worth store across Lemon Avenue. In 1924, view of the corner of Lemon Avenue and Main Street. The Worth brick block and the original wooden Worth building are separated by Lemon Avenue. You can see the train car on Lemon. Madison's website gave a brief history of Chef Madison. He grew up in New York, cooking and gardening side by side with his Italian grandmother, Esther. He began his culinary career at age 15 in a local Greek restaurant and attended the Culinary Institute of America. Upon graduating with honors, Chef Paul Madison went to Aspen, where he refined his skills over the next 5 years working at Pinion's, a one-of-a-kind restaurant receiving top kudos from Zagat. In 1991, Madison relocated to Sarasota as the executive chef and proprietor of Summer House Restaurant on Siesta Key. In September 2001, Chef Paul Madison and Jason Sango created the Madison's concept, which included Madison City Grill. Chef Paul Madison can be seen regularly on ABC's Channel 7 hosting live cooking segments. A Gulf Coast Journal with Jack Perkins filmed 2 segments on Chef Paul Madison. The first one aired on PBS in 2006 and the second in October 2010. We will be walking along Main Street to Five Points and back, looking at the historic buildings or where they were from across the street, which are better views and easier to visualize. Please keep up. We are stopping only to see and talk about the historic buildings. This is not a shopping trip. Save that for after the walk. From here, we will look across the street at the Kennedy Studios, the site of the Main Street Post Office. On this walk, we will see multiple sites where the Sarasota Post Office resided. Here is the first one we'll see. It resided in the Palmer, Florida Company red brick building from 1912 to 1921, Mrs. Carrie S. Abbey, postmaster. The front of the building had a front of red and buff bricks with green woodwork. The post office sign was green and gold. The building itself was 25-foot frontage by 40-foot depth, twice the size of the previous post office. In 1912, there was no mail delivery, so people got their mail either in post office call boxes or standing in line at the counter. When it opened, this post office had 40 large 40 medium, and 190 small call boxes, all opened by key. The architect of the building was Lester Avery, the builder Baxter and Hollinger, and the owner Palmer Florida Company. The need for more post office boxes grew rapidly, and Bertha Palmer agreed in December of 1915 to increase the size of the building so that the post office could add more boxes. In 1917, the U.S. government sent out flags to all post offices. Mrs. Palmer's building on Main Street did not have a flagpole, so Mrs. Carrie S. Abbey hung the flag on the wall. At the beginning of 1920, the city of Sarasota started free mail delivery. The requirement for delivery was that each building had a mailbox and a street number. In May of 1921, Fruitville was allowed rural delivery of mail as well. Back to the walk. Please don't idle at the show windows. Across the street, the Art Deco S.E. Crest building, built in 1932, was one in a national chain of 5 and 10 and 25-cent style retail stores. Built in the Depression, it offered a much-needed 65 local jobs during its construction. It was one of the few buildings built in Sarasota in 1932. The store was opened for inspection on the 30th of November, 1932. It was estimated that 8,000 people walked through the building that day. The following morning, the store was opened for business, bringing to the community a unit of a nationwide system of stores featuring merchandise in the lower price range. The Sarasota branch was the 232nd store opened in the Crest system, which lasted from 1896 to 1981. This is a view of Upper Main from 5 Points. Continuing our walk. Getting close to 5 Points. Okay, we are going to turn left and cross the street. Be careful crossing, watch for cars. We are turning left up here. This was the site of the First Methodist Church before it moved further down on Pineapple Avenue. Several years back, Patrick's Restaurant used to be here. Looking back across the street at 5 Points Plaza. In May of 1924, J.H. Lord moved the old Sarasota House building and started building the first skyscraper in Sarasota. It was to house the First Bank and Trust. He also built the Lord's Arcade, which included 7 store buildings on Central Avenue and 9 store buildings on Upper Main Street, all in Spanish design. The First Bank and Trust was closed on July 17th of 1929, and the depositors received 18.5 cents on the dollar. The Palmer National Bank and Trust opened in the building less than a week later and outright bought the building in the 1930s. Lord moved to Chicago in 1930 and died in 1936. His estate sold the entire Lord's Arcade to 5 merchants for $106,000 in 1944. The Palmer Bank bought and raised the Central Avenue stores in the 1950s to expand into that space. The Main Street side was renamed the Palmer Bank Arcade in 1972. Palmer Bank was sold in 1976. Let's continue. We are in front of the Crest building. Directly across the street was the site of the theater building, now occupied by South Philly Cheesesteak and Darcy and Dana Tyler Home. This is from the 1925 Sanborn insurance map. we will be looking at the building sites marked in red along Main Street. Later, we will find the building site for the Plaza restaurant. The property site we are viewing housed 3 theaters, but first it was the home to K.M. Hebb family. K.M. Hebb, from Auburndale, Florida, came to Sarasota in 1900, built a residence on Main Street, and sent for his wife and 2 sons, Claude and Homer. In 1905, he was a member of the town council. In 1910, his junior high school son, Claude, worked at the Sarasota Times. October of the same year, C.B.S. Wilson was dying, and Claude and Miss Mary Mercer put out the weekly edition by themselves. In early 1911, K.M. Hebb sold his place on Main Street to Mr. Owen Burns and moved to 7th Street. Owen Burns sold the lot and property in 1912 to a B.D. Robinson of North Carolina for $7,000 cash. The moving picture shows in Sarasota. In November 1910, Mr. and Mrs. Griffin moved from Palmetto to Sarasota and opened a tent moving picture show on the Hover lot adjoining the old Hover building. From there, the tent was moved to 7th and Mango Avenue, now Central, and then to the Palms Theater on Lower Main Street. The Griffins sold the movie theater to E.C. Moss in March of 1915, right before the large fire destroyed it in the same year. Mr. Moss moved the theater to the Arcade building. The Virginia Theater opened on March 21, 1916, with the Sarasota Minstrels led by Dr. Jack Halton. B.D. Robinson was the owner. He leased the theater to Murray E. Hall and D.H. Saunders, who changed it to a movie house opening on April 6, 1916, with Jimmy Valentine. D.C. Coons was the theater manager. In December of 1919, the Virginian Theater was sold to Charles Clemenson, who renamed it to the Sarasota Theater and started showing movies in April 1920. The theater changed its name to the Ritz in 1934, at which point it was run by the E.J. Sparks Circuit. The Ritz was the first of the 2 major downtown theaters to close. It was operated by Florida State Theaters in its later years. The building was demolished in 1968 and a parking lot was established in its place. This is another picture of the Ritz at the end of Lord's Arcade and across the street from the Crest Building. The site of the Thacker Ringling Park and the Ringling Trust and Savings Bank is now occupied by Cruise Electric Bikes and Happy Feet Plus and Serenity Wellness and the Fat Donkey and the Mercantile Home and Apparel. Thacker Ringling Park. In the lot between the Sarasota Theater and George Thacker's Funeral Chapel building, a park was created in July of 1922. Charles Ringling donated the use of the lot and paid for sprucing up of the lot. The Thacker Ringling Park contained 2 quoits courts, 1 roque court, and space for horseshoe competitions. Roque is an American variant of croquet played on a hard, smooth surface. Popular in the first quarter of the 20th century and billed the game of the century by its enthusiasts, it was an Olympic sport in the 1904 Summer Games, replacing croquet from the previous games. Quoits is a traditional game which involves the throwing of metal, rope, or rubber rings over a set distance, usually to land over or near a spike. The sport of quoits encompasses several distinct variations. The Thacker Ringling Park didn't last long. Charles Ringling built the Ringling Trust and Savings Bank on this lot in January of 1924 and built an annex next to it in June of the same year. The Ringling Bank and Trust Company went into voluntary liquidation on May 1, 1933, but Mrs. Edith Ringling, widow of Charles Ringling, paid off the depositors in full at a loss to herself of a reported $250,000. By 1959, the building became a J.C. Penney's. The site of Thacker's funeral chapel is now occupied by Wet Noses and Helmuth Stone Gallery and Show Nails and Spa. The two-story building next to the park or bank was known for a while as the Owen Burns Building, housing the Burns Realty Company from 1910 to 1920. George Thacker came to Sarasota in 1910 and opened a jewelry and optical department in the Badger Pharmacy in the Gillespie block at Five Points. He took his Florida State examination in 1912 and became a licensed embalmer. He worked out of the Highsmith Prime and Company buildings until he bought this property in 1920. The building became Sarasota's first funeral chapel. In 1922, he started an ambulance service. By 1959, the building was home of the William H. Wood Company and later the Sarasota Bank and Trust Company. Mr. F. W. Van Gilder eventually joined Mr. Thacker, and the funeral home became known as Thacker Van Gilder Funeral Home. The funeral home began operating out of 40 North Orange Avenue in 1925. The funeral home was purchased by the Toll family in 1948. The site for the Ouida Hotel is now occupied by Bompton Sarasota and Sorrento Suites and Eleganza. In 1912, Stanley Ouida from Allentown, Pennsylvania, bought a 100-foot by 66-foot lot on Main Street near Lemon Avenue for $7,500. He built a 3-story, 34-bedroom hotel with electric lights and bells and hot and cold water in every room. He leased the Hotel Ouida to Mr. and Mrs. L.L. Arnold, who opened it on December 15, 1913. The Arnolds gave up their lease after 5 years because of Mrs. Arnold's serious illness and operations in 1918. Mr. and Mrs. Hall from Dade City took up the lease, and the Ouida Cafe was opened in the first-story dining room. This seemed to be a downturn for the hotel, and in 1921 it was opened as a rooming house by Mr. and Mrs. Ralph M. Creveling, and the first floor rented out as a store. Finally, in 1922, Captain Lewis Roberts, a local who had run a hotel on Siesta Key, was a renowned seafood chef, leased the Ouida Hotel and kept it open during the summers. By the 1940s, the hotel had changed owners and had changed its name to the DeSoto Hotel. The property was purchased in the 1950s by James and Jane Hanna Sr., and in 1973 it was demolished to build their business office at that spot. Let's continue our walk. Kennedy Studios, location of the Palmer Building Post Office. We are approaching the southeast corner of Lemon Avenue and Main Street, the site of the Worth Building. Back to the Worth Building. We'll be turning right heading south on Lemon Avenue. In April of 1921, W.D. Worth sold his interest in the Enterprise Grocery to his father, William Worth, and secured the rear half of the building for his wholesale feed, grain, and fertilizer business. He had a door put in opening to Lemon Avenue where he received shipments from the railroad. Let's walk south on Lemon Avenue. Here is the rear door and the alley that runs behind all the stores on Main Street and ends at Pineapple Avenue. The Mark condominium is so huge it swallowed up State Street. This is the corner of Lemon Avenue and State Street. The corner building is on the site of the first Sarasota Municipal Waterworks. Screen shows the 1913 Sanborn insurance maps. Both facilities were on Lemon Avenue. The waterworks bordered on 6th Avenue, now State Street. The Sarasota Ice and Electric Company was just south of the waterworks, ending on 5th Street, which doesn't exist today. From the story of Sarasota. In 1905, the town had no water system. The people still had to depend on cisterns or shallow wells. There were no sewers, no electricity, no gas, no streetlights except the 3 kerosene lamps bought in 1903. Owen Burns, new to Sarasota, heard that the town council might award a franchise for waterworks. He told the council that if they were going to award a franchise, he was in to compete, but he thought it better for the town to own their own waterworks. In 1911, a contract for drilling an artesian well and laying the water and sewer mains was let to the American Light and Water Company. The job to cost $18,840. Before the year ended, the business section and the central residential section had both water and sewers. The water was obtained from a well drilled at 6th and Lemon. The main trunk sewer was laid 400 feet out into the bay. In June of 1911, the water tank was erected, and by August the tank was full of water. Almost immediately, the water looked dark and had a strong sulfur smell. The city officials said the water was fine and some coloration is normal when you first turn on the system. The problem is the pipes. That was the Sarasota Times, November 1911. In March of 1912, the water was analyzed and contained a high percent of minerals which were not due to the pipes. Other techniques to improve the water were tried. An overflow pipe so that the water would run all the time, a concrete reservoir to aerate the water, and a settling tank. Still, the water was dark and inky. Finally, in 1914, someone came up with the idea of testing other wells around the area to see if they had the same problem. Meanwhile, Burns and Huell, who had a well nearby, Pineapple and Lemon, which ran clear water, allowed the city to use their well as a test, and if they liked it, they could purchase it for the waterworks. Well, that was the trick. And to get more volume, they drilled a companion well next to the Huell well. No complaints after that. While this drama played out, the city had put water pipes throughout the city and put in water mains and fire hydrants. Continuing down Lemon Avenue. Lemon Avenue used to go straight and not turn here. It changed sometime after the building of the Goodhart Fountain. This picture shows the alley that divided the lots for Waterworks and the Ice and Electric Company. In April 1909, the town granted a 30-year franchise to Herman P. Porter to provide electricity to the town with the provision that after each 10-year period, the town could purchase the power plant. 9 months later, the Sarasota Ice, Light, and Power Company was bought by 2 men from St. Petersburg, J.G. Lewis and R.E. Ludwig. By April of 1910, they started installing electric lights in homes and on the streets, turning on the power at dusk and off at midnight. In May, the company incorporated. Through the years, the company promised additional services like all-night electricity and morning current for ironing and other uses. A feeble attempt was made in 1911 to leave the electricity on until 1 a.m. and turn it on again from 4 to 6 a.m., but soon thereafter they removed the morning current and turned off power at midnight again. In June of 1916, they announced ironing service on Tuesday and Friday mornings from 7 to 11 a.m., but shortly removed Friday morning current. They also again promised all-night service. As the franchise approached its 10-year anniversary, Sarasota had enough. Other smaller towns had their own power companies and had none of the issues that Sarasota did with its franchise. The Sarasota Ice and Electric Company fought the purchase of the power plant and estimated its worth at $75,000. In the end, Sarasota passed a bond issue for $80,000 to purchase the plant and build a new one that would meet the city's requirements. After litigation, the city purchased the power plant minus the ice plant for $27,500 in April of 1919. The city used the old power plant until a new one was built and up and running. Times change, and the city sold the municipal power plant to FPL less than 10 years later, but that is another story. A picture of the Waterworks water tower and the Sarasota Ice and Electric Company power plant on Lemon Avenue. We see a first glance of the Good Heart Fountain, aka the Mermaid Fountain. In November of 1993, an artist from Bradenton, Nancy Goodhart Matthews, created the Goodhart Place Fountain, aka the Mermaid Fountain, in Pineapple Park, now part of Paul Thorpe Park. Nancy Matthews has lived in Bradenton for over 25 years with her lawyer husband in a concrete block house overlooking the Manatee River. She has built a small shrine to Our Lady of Guadalupe, she used to live in Mexico, and an homage to the Calusa Indians. When the fountain has running water, it is a pretty sight, but even with the rehab in 2005 and again in 2017, it has fallen from its glory days, but it's still something to see if you're in the area. For many years, Lemon Avenue intersected with Pineapple Avenue south of the fountain at 5th Street. In the area occupied by the fountain were gas stations. In the 1920s, a Sunoco gas station was here, and in the 1940s, a Gulf Oil gas station claimed the spot. As mentioned earlier, Lemon Avenue now curves onto Pineapple Avenue next to the Mark condominium. 5th Street would have connected Lemon and Pineapple just south of here. 5th Street also marked the southern border of the Sarasota Ice and Electric plant. From around this spot to the Mark condominium was a triangle piece of land which housed the first fire department in Sarasota. In January of 1912, the triangle-shaped property located between Pineapple and Lemon Avenues was chosen. The construction was completed, and by March of 1912, the Sarasota Fire Department had their first fire station. The Sarasota Volunteer Fire Company was formed in April of 1912 with C.M. Schneider as fire chief. A few months later, it was renamed to the Sarasota Fire Department with Henry Behrens as fire chief. The fire department buildings had their sides and roofs of metal, which prevented them from catching fire. Sarasota started to organize 2 volunteer fire department companies in 1911, supplying them with a chemical hose wagon and hook and ladder truck. Later in the year, after fire mains and hydrants were installed, the town ordered fire hose and 3 hand-drawn hose carts. At this time, there was no home for the fire department. The equipment was stored in Turner's garage on Main Street. The chemical hose wagon tank contained water in which bicarbonate of soda was dissolved. When sulfuric acid was added to the mixture, carbon dioxide gas formed. Enough pressure would then build up in the closed container to expel the water under great pressure. The speed of the reaction meant that the town's new chemical engine was ready for action on a moment's notice. The problem was that each of these wagons had to be carted to the fire by the firemen, which wore them out before fighting the fire. In January of 1915, the City Council purchased an American La France chemical pump and hose auto fire engine truck, which was to be delivered in May of the same year. But before the fire engine could be delivered, Sarasota experienced its worst fire up to that point, the Tonnelier Fire at 5 Points. The Sarasota Fire Department fought the fire for hours and called the Bradenton Fire Department for help. The Iverson buildings were made of concrete block and stopped the procession of the fire. By the time Bradentown's team arrived, the fire had run its course with smoldering areas being soaked. They tried to mount their hoses onto Sarasota's fire hydrants, but the connections were of different standards and they could not use their hoses. If you can find it, the book Buckets and Brawn, The History of Sarasota and Its Fire Department by Wayne A. Welch is an excellent source of history and pictures on the topic. The picture is at the corner of William Street, now McCanch Square, and Pineapple Avenue. Jordan Motor Car Company from 1916 to 1931, founded by Edward Ned Jordan. The factory produced what were known as assembled cars until 1931, using components from other manufacturers. Jordan cars were noted more for attractive styling than for advanced engineering. They produced such models as the Playboy, Tomboy, Blue Boy, and a special order Speedway Ace. The building to the right with the tower was the This Week in Sarasota, a weekly owned by J.V. Moore and Robert Dooley and published during the 1920 boom years by Edward Lansing Cowles, who was finally forced because of ill health to give up the publication. During the late 30s, through the war years, it was the very popular Casa Madrid restaurant. In the 1950s, it was home to the veterans of foreign wars, and in the 1990s, it was the home of the Barnett Bank. Let's continue. We're going to turn left and cross Pineapple Avenue. Then we will turn right and cross McCanch Square. In the middle of the intersection, notice the design of the pineapple. This area used to be called Pineapple Park. It is now called Paul Thorpe Park. Let's walk up Pineapple Avenue towards 5 Points. We are walking by the First Methodist Church. Across the street, State Street emerges from the Mark. This corner was once the home of George A. Kaysen, a rest place for weary travelers, and a restaurant. Pineapple Avenue and 6th Street, now State Street, on the southeast corner was the home of George A. Kaysen and wife. George A. Kaysen, before 1890, was a merchant in Myakka. In February of that year, he decided to move to Sarasota and open a store. He opened up in the Grable building at 5 Points. He bought and moved to the Florida Mortgage and Investment Company store building at Lower Main Street and Gulfstream Avenue in 1894 and made space for the post office with Mrs. Carrie Abbey as postmaster in the back of the store. He moved out of Sarasota about 1903. In 1917, the Women's Club took over the residence and made it into a farmer's bungalow with the hope the farmers and out-of-town shoppers will avail themselves of this comfortable place to rest or eat their lunch. A cot is available to anyone wishing to lie down or put a child to sleep. Notice Sarasota's first church, the Methodist Church, across Pineapple Avenue. The original church, which was located at 5 Points, is behind the new brick church building. The Tiptoe Inn was opened in November of 1925 at the corner of Pineapple Avenue and 6th Street, now State Street, at the same lot as the Kaysen home and the Women's Club's Farmer Bungalow. The owners, A.K. Bauer and Joseph Greenberg, both of New York, hired Louis Gerstel, a head chef from Chicago, and a New York Chinese chef. They were open for breakfast, dinner, supper, afternoon teas, and after-theater suppers, along with a catering service. On the opposite corner once stood a newspaper building. On the corner of Pineapple and 6th Street was the home of the Sarasota Tribune newspaper. For 4 years, the city had both a Sarasota Herald and a Sarasota Tribune. The former was organized in October 1925 by David Lindsay and others. In 1934, the Tribune was founded by the Palmer interests with B.W. Powell as publisher. It was situated in this building on South Pineapple. In 1938, the Tribune was sold to David Lindsay. Continuing our walk. Sarasota's first Methodist church was chartered in 1891 as the Sarasota Methodist Episcopal Church. Harry Heigl purchased the original church lot for $40 at 5 Points corner of Upper Main Street and South Pineapple Avenue in 1892. The Methodists built the first church in Sarasota in 1893, which resembled a barn before adding a belfry, a vestibule, a steeple, and of course a bell. In 1911, J.H. Lord offered to buy the church lot for $1,600, plus the cost of moving the church to a lot on South Pineapple Avenue. The deal was struck, but before moving the church, the steeple had to be removed, never to be reattached. In 1914, a large red brick church was built on the site, and in 1922, the old church was moved and rebuilt to Newtown for the Bethel CME Church. On Christmas Day in 1955, the newer, larger sanctuary held its first service. Several of the people we have mentioned or will mention on this walk were early members of this church. Harry Heigl, Mrs. Isadore Spencer, mother of Mrs. Carrie Abbey, J.H. Lord, Claude Hebb, who worked at the Sarasota Times at a young age, and Mr. and Mrs. George Thacker. The Downing building, later known as the Cummer Arcade, was located where this parking garage sits today. In 1921, the post office moved from their brick building on Upper Main Street into the larger quarters by subleasing the old Archibald Furniture Store space in the Downey building on Pineapple Avenue next to the Methodist Church. The building must have been sold to Mr. A.E. Cummer sometime after 1921 because it is commonly called the Cummer Arcade. This is the Sanford Insurance map of 1925 showing the post office location in the Downey building. Other businesses occupying space here were the Roth News Company, the Hunt Agency, insurance, and C.O. Teat, real estate. Note, at the top of the picture you can see a triangle containing the hospital office. This is for Dr. Joseph Halton's private hospital. This is the location of Dr. Joseph Halton's private hospital next to the alley that serves the stores on Upper Main Street. Dr. Joseph Halton, brother of Dr. Jack Halton, came to Sarasota about 1906. Unlike his brother, who was an EENT specialist, Joe was a general physician and surgeon. He was elected Sarasota City Physician in December of 1907. Like his brother, he was a talented singer. He had offices at different times in the Gillespie block, at 5 Points, at the Tonnelier building before it burned down, and the Halton building on Main Street in 1916. In 1919, he purchased a lot on Pineapple Avenue, started work on the 2-story building in May of 1921, and moved into the office building that September. On the ground floor, there was a waiting room which accommodated patients of Dr. Halton and Dr. Noble, who had an office in the building, a consultation room, a laboratory, an operating room, an x-ray room, a developing room, one bedroom for patients who required the constant attention of the doctor, a bath, and a diet room. On the second floor, there were 2 apartments of 2 bedrooms, bath, dining room, and kitchenette each, and 1 apartment of 3 rooms, bath, and kitchenette. In April of 1922, Joe started calling the building the Halton Hospital in an ad instead of an office or clinic. In February 1923, he offered Sarasota County a room to cover emergency charity cases for $25 per month. Based on the story of Sarasota, the Joseph Halton Hospital has been enlarged several times since it was first opened in 1921. After his death in 1963, the first floor was being used as a rehearsal hall and headquarters for a ballet troupe, and the upper floor was popular with artists, musicians, and young business and professional people seeking low rent in a convenient downtown location. Eventually, a fire destroyed the building. Dr. Joe Halton. In 1951, he was recognized Citizen of the Year by the American Legion for performing over 1,600 free operations and providing care to needy children. This building bordering Lower Main Street and South Pineapple used to be the site of the first concrete block building in Sarasota, the Gillespie Block. Mrs. Carrie S. Abbey, as postmaster, was located in Harry Heigl's wooden shack on this corner of Pineapple and Main from 1899 to 1905. In 1905, J. Hamilton Gillespie built Sarasota's first concrete block building, and Mrs. Abbey and the post office moved into it and stayed until she outgrew the space and moved to Upper Main Street in 1912. We'll continue walking toward 5 Points. We are going to cross Main Street on the crosswalk. Watch for cars. When across, we will veer to the left a little. We are going to turn a little to the right and walk down Central Avenue, which used to be Mango Avenue. Here is a shot down Central Avenue similar to the next frame. This is the entrance to Mango Avenue at 5 Points. To the left is a triangle lot owned by J.H. Lord, containing a water tower and 3 two-story cottages. Continuing up Central. The triangle lot once contained J.H. Lord's 3 cottages as seen in the next frame. J.H. Lord's and Mrs. Weber's cottages on Mango Avenue, now Central Avenue, currently part of Selby Park. We have arrived at the corner of First Street and Central Avenue. We will continue on to 2nd Street to view a few more sights and then come back to this corner. Please cross the road with care. Note, the Selby Library is on the opposite corner. We made it. Now let's go to 2nd Street. We arrived at the corner of 2nd Street and Central Avenue. The corner we are on, as seen from across the street, used to be the home of the Central Hotel in the early 1900s. The Central, aka Central Hotel, was a small hotel boarding house with 11 rooms, bath and electric lights, open only during the winter tourist season. It was popular for a while, but as the new, larger, more modern hotels were built, the Central went out of favor, actually closing for a number of years. The corner across the street used to be the home of Mrs. Carrie Abbey. Across the street was the home of Sarasota's postmaster, Mrs. Carrie Abbey, who lived there from 1894 to 1921. In January of 1922, she moved to her new house on East Main Street, at that time called Victory Avenue. Across the street from Carrie Abbey and behind the Central Hotel was the First Baptist Church building. Grandma Spencer, mother of Mrs. Carrie Spencer Abbey, and her parrot, Mrs. Isadore Spencer, lived with her daughter until her death in 1929 at the age of 95. Carrie Spencer married Myron Abbey and moved to Sarasota to join Myron's cousin Charles Abbey, the first postmaster of Sarasota in 1891. Shortly after Carrie became the postmaster, Myron left Sarasota, apparently abandoning Carrie. Carrie's mother, Mrs. Isadore Spencer, soon moved in with Carrie, and they lived in this house for 27 years. Besides being postmaster for over 30 years, Carrie mingled with the younger generation, holding weddings in her house and sponsoring excursions around the area. Carrie died in 1940 at age 84. And this was the site of Sarasota's first Baptist church building. In March of 1902, Reverend Isaac Redd from Bee Ridge met with 5 persons in Sarasota about starting a Baptist church in Sarasota. While they did not have a physical church building, the Methodist Church at 5 Points allowed them to use their building on Sunday afternoons. 3 years later, the congregation finished building their church on 8th Street, now 2nd Street. Mr. William Worth joined the church in 1903, was put on the building committee, and helped physically build the church. The church was a one-room, white-framed building that had a bell tower. After the church building was finished, he became the second Sunday school superintendent. In 1919, the building was near its capacity, and in 1920, they bought a building site on Main Street and Adelia Avenue for $2,500. They finished building their first building at that site in 1924. Time to head back. One more site and we're finished. Arriving at the corner of First Street and Central Avenue. We'll cross the street and turn left onto the First Street sidewalk. A look at the motor court of the plaza at 5 Points. We've arrived. This garage entrance once housed the Plaza restaurant. The Sanborn map shows where the Plaza Spanish restaurant was. The Plaza Spanish restaurant opened in 1928 when other businesses were closing. It was a place to go for social, political, and business get-togethers. Bankers and developers would put deals together here. Lawyers, judges, and politicians discussed current events. Writers and artists would come to socialize and have serious literary discussion, and all to get a great meal. In the 1930s, a poker game started in the back room. Soon it grew into a local tradition, and most of the town's notables playing a hand at one time or another. The plaza itself never made any money from the game, just goodwill. In the 1950s, Liar's Poker had become part of the Friday lunch gathering. Whoever played and lost the game bought the one round of drinks for that day. After the gamesters began recording the weekly results, a rotating plaque went to the person for Worst Liar of the Year. McKinley Cantor won the prize the first year. Randy Hagerman, the owner, died in the 1960s, and the plaza closed down. The restaurant was given a new lease on life during the 1980s when it reopened as Merlin's, and the writers' group started meeting again. However, it was short-lived, and Merlin's closed in 1988. Demolition of the Plaza building. We're going back to the beginning just down the street. We're approaching the corner of Lemon Avenue and First Street where we started. I hope you enjoyed your walk today, and we hope to see you in the future.